Escalated Live. Catch the podcast on kaya959.co.za. Point of view
on Kaya 959
with Phemelo Motene.
What's yours?
I must say, I think we all have to also remember that we are full into election season, so don't be surprised. A lot of these kinds of fights are going to be showing themselves up clearly by political parties. We've just spoken about the DA going to court for the Expropriation Act. Now we're talking about the city manager being asked to return back to office, and all of these court cases, most of them very, very politically motivated. So we're in for a long ride until the 4th of November, it may seem. Okay, on to this now, to Russia. And as I was saying to you, as of about an hour ago, Russian media was telling us about 7 people who've been killed at an explosion at a beach site, and reports are that it may be by a Ukraine drone. And this is really, we've been seeing quite a large exchange of fire. And I think what is interesting this time around is how close to Moscow the action has come. We saw an explosion at a restaurant in Moscow by a lady who had what seemed like a homemade bomb, so to speak. She died, as well as the security guard thereof. But a lot of movement happening there. Just to help us unpack what's actually happening there is Defense Strategy Analyst, Dr. Joan Swart. A very good evening to you, Dr. Swart, and thank you so much once again for making time for us.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
There seems to clearly be a shift in how Ukraine and Russia are now, changing gear in this, I think Russia is calling it a special operation.
A special military operation,
yes. Special military operation. But clearly, things are shifting somewhat, and the power dynamics and is not necessarily looking like it's sitting with Russia only at the moment.
Well, definitely, the latest fighting has definitely intensified, and it's no longer, as you alluded to, confined to the front lines. So it does still span the conventional military operations inside Ukraine, but there's now a lot of long-range strikes, covert intelligence operations, including terrorism, and then targeted attacks deep inside both of the countries. So if I can just mention a couple of things that's just happened in the last week or two. You mentioned the bombing at the restaurant that killed 5 people last time I checked and injured about 19 others. Now, no one has claimed responsibility, and they are investigating, but many people believe that the target was the commander of Russia's aerospace forces, who was reportedly having a birthday party.
Yeah.
Yes. So the modus operandi resembles previous attacks that Ukraine has carried out inside Russia. And then they are, as you also said, continuing their drone attacks deep inside Russia. So Russia has responded, and they've attacked or bombed using missiles, drones, and so-called glide bombs, Kiev and Lviv, the cities inside of Ukraine, for the last week or so. They've also attacked the 2 main ports, Odessa and Mykolaiv. So Ukraine is currently basically a landlocked country because the ports are out of action. And then 2 things that were really worrying is Ukraine's attack on an Iranian ship in the Caspian Sea. Now, I don't know if that was a deliberate attempt of them to fuse the 2 wars together and to draw other players in, to broaden the theater of this conflict. And then there's Poland, was complaining that their airspace has been violated, and they are investigating that as well.
One of the things that has been quite apparent is that we are obviously also consuming the propaganda by both sides in interesting ways. So others would tell you that no, Russia doesn't necessarily report on all the attacks because they don't want to be seen to be weak. But that certainly there must be some level of distress, especially with the attack of key infrastructure spots by the Ukrainian government, and of course on the other side as well, there's the flip side of that, where Ukraine itself is also propping itself up, wanting to look successful. Now, propaganda is quite a unique and very important element of warfare, and in this instance, interesting because it depends who you're hearing what from.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been controlled so much. I mean, that RT, the old Russia Today, is banned basically in all of the West. And I don't know if it's available still here.
No, it's
I
not.
know
it's not.
it was taken. Yeah, so I watched that online just to get a perspective from the Russian side. And then, of course, the Western media covers the Ukrainian side quite well. So it does play a large role, and the information is manipulated, especially, if you talk about losses of human life on the battlefield, it's quite an exercise to try and get an idea of the numbers there, and then other important infrastructure as well.
One of the things that I think is starting to worry some analysts when you look at how they are consuming the narrative is they're contesting where both sides want to begin the discussion on the war. So mostly at the moment you are hearing a lot of, even at the beginning, Russia saying, well, remember, this war, I'm responding to a poke, so to speak, by the Europeans,
yes.
And then of course on the other side, Russia is now being seen and has always been seen as the aggressor. And so that narrative, I think, is very important, looking at how exactly one wants to analyze who's the devil and who's the angel, I suppose.
Yeah, it actually, it started a long time ago. In the 90s or even before, if you look at the Soviet Union and the way they were demonized, but it started in 1997. I think they were promised that NATO would not expand towards their borders. And then slowly it happened and it continued to happen. And then things escalated when the coup in Ukraine was done in 2014. And the government, Zelensky's government, started then to attack the Donbass, the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine. And I think Russia was definitely the aggressor if you look at it very technically, but they let it go, and it became not only a threat for what they regard as their people in Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, and they've got a large Russian-speaking population. But they also saw the signs that Ukraine may join NATO, and that would have been a real threat to their own national security. So that's basically a little bit of a background where the special military operation started.
So, Dr. Swart, explain then to me, if we go back to the very point that you started with, that, we are looking first of all at a NATO that reneged on its own promise. Why is it that when they do come together at fora like the EU, the EU, as well as the United Nations, that is not a point of discussion? It's almost, the discussion begins where, as you're saying, from the technical aggression point of view, where, okay, Russia decides to wake up and decides to attack, whereas actually we need to go back to what the agreement was, even though it wasn't quite cast in stone.
Yes, that's kind of debated still, but it is on record. And then you've got the Minsk agreements, which actually Angela Merkel said afterwards that it was a ruse. You know, they just wanted to buy time in order to arm Ukraine. So that was, they acknowledged and admitted that as well. So that's very problematic, and I don't think in the UN and the EU that they are sometimes very objective, especially if you've got, you know, you see debates happening there across the aisle, and you've got one standpoint from the Western side and one standpoint maybe from Russia and China and the so-called global South standpoint, and they differ quite a bit. But I don't think there's going to be an outcome here other than on the battlefield itself. And I can just maybe predict that it's going to be some kind of a frozen conflict unless, you know, Ukraine collapses politically and economically, which is not impossible.
Trump has been not very friendly with NATO, and so he's not going to be pouring, well, if we go by what he says, too much of the resources.
A few times
exactly. If we look at his posture, he's not about to pour in more resources, and you know, the Europeans at the moment say a lot, but don't come forth much. To what extent do you think they will continue supporting properly, in real terms, Ukraine?
I don't think the U.S. has got a lot of appetite. He's far too busy in on the other side of the world, or not really other side, but you know, elsewhere. And the public in the U.S. also does not have an appetite. They've got an election coming, as you know, the midterms in November. So he's under real pressure there in Iran. On the European side, it's looking a bit different. I think there's still appetite from especially the UK and Germany. I think not very long ago they promised more money, billions of euros to Ukraine. But again, both Macron and Merz has got a lower than 40% support, public support, or approval rating. So they are also under political pressure, and then they also under economic pressure because the sanctions did not really, it really cost them a lot in terms of what they're paying for energy right now and all the money that they're giving to Ukraine and all the weaponry. But they are intending to militarize quite a lot by, I think their plans are 2030. Now that's going to cost them a lot as well. And interestingly enough, they'll be more militarized then with the plans that they have got in hand than they were by World War II. So that's also a real concern.
So I'm hearing now more and more boldly the attempts to bring back the conversation of Ukraine joining NATO. And I almost want to cringe because I keep thinking, please God, don't, because I'm not sure that Russia is going to let that fly. I think we will be in for quite a fight.
Yeah, no, and that's why they want Ukraine as weak as possible. I mean, we need to go back and look at their objectives when they started this operation, and it hasn't changed at all. It was to demilitarize Ukraine, and they're really doing well in that regard, and that's where their war of attrition is working. They're just grinding. It's like a meat grinder almost. They're grinding all the weapons and the manpower and everything in this war over time. They wanted to liberate Donbass. They're not too far from that. They've got 100% of Lugansk and then 85% of Donetsk. Now they have added Kherson, of which they've got 70%, and Zaporozhye, which they've got 75% of the geographical area of these oblasts. And then the third thing is, and this is where it comes in, what you've been saying, is they wanted to ensure their own national security. So they don't want NATO on their doorstep. And unfortunately, they're already surrounded in a way by NATO members, like Finland, for instance, in the Balkan countries. So it's a problem, but if they can win on the battlefield, then Ukraine may not join, or they may join and it won't mean much. But at the same time, the EU is under pressure. The US is pretty weak at the moment militarily, so that helps them as well.
I do appreciate your time this evening, and thank you so much for giving us your analysis. I look forward to more conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's Dr. Joan Swart. She is a defense and strategic analyst, just helping us understand what's happening currently. As I was saying to you, it's actually currently unfolding, that war between Russia and Ukraine. And I say currently is because they're bombs that are being thrown right now that have been reported on as we speak. So it's always been there for a while. It's, I think, 4 years now, but there's some intensity that's developing over the past 48 hours.
If you missed it live, catch the podcast on kaya959.co.za.